So I'd like to welcome everybody today and especially welcome Mandy, who's going to be taking over and once again giving us one of her excellent presentations. No pressure there, Mandy, obviously. So, as we've outlined, please raise your hand either physically, because there are enough of us for me to keep an eye on in the group, or use the raise hand reaction and it'll bring you to top left of the screen. And so you'll get noticed more easily. And there's the chat that you can contribute to as well. We will be watching that. So, Mandy, over to you. And thank you very much.
Okay. I just share my screen. And start the show. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, I think we can. Thanks, Mandy.
Let me know if the slides don't change. Okay, we had that problem before, but I've hopefully taken everything off that might influence that. And bear with me, I had COVID at the beginning of the month and I'm fine, except I've still got a bit of a scratchy throat. So if I start coughing, that's why. So today's talk, it's a follow-up to the previous one. And we're going to look at the young, the active, and weddings. And I chose weddings because nearly every family have wedding photographs in their family group. So I thought that was quite an interesting one to do. In terms of the active, I'm going to look at tennis, swimming, cycling, and football, because those I thought were the most likely that you might have a picture of somebody in that kind of outfit. So, how to date photographs of children. Has the screen changed? Yep, good.
Yes, it has, Mandy.
Thank you. So, fashions are influenced by the age of the child, the sex of the child, the time period, and the latest fashion trends. However, there is a problem because children's clothing changed slowly, and once something became fashionable, it stayed fashionable for quite a long time. So it is quite difficult to date. It's relatively easy if you've got a family group like this because you can look at the adults. It's much more difficult where you've got a picture of a child on its own. But there are some clues which I'm going to give you. At the early part of the period, children's clothes were all made by hand, either at home or if you could afford it, you had a street seamstress make it for you. With the Industrial Revolution, we got sewing machines, which speeded up the process. But by the 1890s, ready-made clothes were available from shops. For the working class and poor children, they tended more to wear hand-me-downs and had adult clothes cut down to fit them. But of course, there was the tradition of the Sunday best, where you wore your best outfit, your newest outfit, your smartest outfit. And the chances are that if you're going to have your photograph taken, that's what you would wear as well. So let's look first at the young, the 0 to 4. Very young children in the early period of photography, there aren't many photographs of very young children, and probably because of the difficulty of keeping them still long enough to get the photograph. You do occasionally get pictures of mothers with babies. But as photographic techniques improved, you then start to get more pictures of children, and they became more popular. It is quite difficult to date during this period because boys and girls were dressed the same, and they were dressed the same for a very long period. So you can look for clues in other parts of the picture. What kind of chair is the child sitting on? What's the background? Babies wore long gowns with hems way past their feet until they began to crawl. These long gowns were usually of cotton so that they were easy to wash and launder, and sometimes white caps with lace and trimmings were worn as well. A very decorative gown, such as the one this baby is wearing, could be an indication of a christening. As the child began to crawl, the length of the dress shortened, but still white cotton was favoured. And then as they became toddlers, both boys and girls were dressed in skirts and dresses. So how do you tell the difference? Well, boys had their hair parted at the side, and girls tended to have their hair parted in the middle. And you can also look to see if they're holding anything. So a boy might be holding a boat and a girl might be holding a doll. The reason for this keeping everybody in white dresses was families tended to be large. So you could pass down the clothing, no matter whether it was a boy or a girl, you could pass it down. It's also much easier to deal with nappies and toilet training if boys are wearing a dress, and they were easy to wash. Boys were breeched, that's they were put into pants or knickerbockers in up to 1890 at about 5. After that period, the age dropped and they were breeched at about 3, once they were toilet trained. From 1860 to 1910, post-mortem photographs were also particularly popular. And these portraits of children focused on the deceased, who were either displayed asleep or sometimes actually with the family, so they looked like part of the family. And the images were kept in family albums as a kind of record of the child's existence. So Victorian girls I'm going to look at first. In the 1850s, girls' clothing was a miniature of the adults' version. They were shorter to just below the knee and were made of sturdier material generally. Young girls began to wear corsets when they were about 13, and their skirts steadily lengthened throughout their teenage years. And the chart you can see there was published in Harper's Bazaar in the 1860s to show you where the skirt should reach for the various ages of the child. The format of a close-fitting bodice and flared skirt, which was fashionable in the 50s, remained the prominent girls' fashion throughout the 60s and the 70s, which makes it a very hard thing to date. You need to help you date, if you look at the trimmings and the kind of sleeve, that would give you some sort of clue. So the girls here are about 1860, and you can tell that by the sleeve cut. Woolen stockings, which were usually pale in colour or could be striped, were worn with leather buttoned boots. And once long enough, the hair was worn in a bun, and sometimes with ringlets over the ears. It wasn't until the 1880s that girls' fashions caught up with the women's fashions again. Girls' dresses took on a new narrow shape with decorative flouncings and details echoing the adult's dress. Black stockings became popular, and the hairstyles changed to keep up with the narrow silhouette. So long, straight styles, worn loose and secured with ribbons, became fashionable. And very young girls might also have a fringe. In the 1890s, there was a radical change in girls' dress with the introduction of the smock or yoke dress. This allowed the fabric to fall freely from the yoke to the hem, providing a more practical and comfortable kind of garment. Just as in this period, adults, the decoration was all about the bodice and the around the neckline and the sleeves, so it was for the girls' dresses. Older girls tended to wear a style based on the smock, but pulled in at the waist, which made it more in keeping with adult styles. In the early decades of the 20th century, dresses remained much as they did in the latter part of the 19th. Smock dress styles caught at the waist or caught at the hip and reaching to the knee. Older girls wore their dresses calf length, and their hair was pulled back from the face and hung freely down the back. By the 1910s, and the clue for this is the way that the hair is dressed. And instead of going down the back, the hair was decorated at the front with big bows. There was a boom in dressmaking in the 20s and 30s, and girls' dresses were often made by their mothers. Simple shift-style dresses were worn, very short for young girls, and to the knee for older girls. And this was popular throughout the 1920s and 30s. So again, making it quite difficult to work out an exact decade. But again, there are clues. So in the 1920s, short socks were worn with laced or barred shoes rather than the leather boots of the Victorian period. By the 1930s, socks tended to be longer and older girls wore black stockings. At the beginning of the 20s, hair was still worn long and dressed as the decade before. But as the 20s wore on, the hairstyles followed the adults' hairstyles and became short, severe bobs. And this fashion continued into the 30s. The establishment of a school uniform was a significant feature of the 1920s, and characterized chiefly by the gym slip, a sleeveless tunic with a square neck and boxed pleats, worn with a blouse and tie. By the 1930s, the gym slip was well established and the style was worn outside of school as well. In the 1940s, material rationing meant that girls' dresses became shorter and less embellished. Hand-knitted garments and homemade dresses and blouses were all popular. Older girls wore utility clothing like their mothers, but with white socks and sensible laced boots, shoes rather. The hair remained short, but with a slightly less severe cut and decorated with ribbon. I could never keep mine in, they always used to slide down. In the 1950s, girls' dresses became longer again, dropping to the knee. Skirts were gathered into the bodice at the waist and were full. Puff sleeves, smocking, and Peter Pan collars are all popular. The gym slip was gradually replaced by the more modern pinafore or blouse and skirt. We're going down to the girls, I beg your pardon, the boys, and look at Victorian boys. So after breeching, boys in the 1850s wore long, loose trousers with a tunic that was more closely related to the line of female wear than men's. During the transitional phase between 4 and 11, sailor suits with a distinctive collar were an alternative to the tunic and trousers. Sailor suits remained popular throughout the whole of the 19th century. At 11, boys began to wear long trousers with shirts and jackets, and by 14, boys became young men and dressed like their fathers. And that 14 age is related to when they would have left school and started work. In the 1860s, a new outfit was developed for boys, a woolen suit comprising a short open jacket with sloping front, a sort of bolero style, with matching short trousers, often buckled below the knee, and a waistcoat. This was known as the Zouave jacket after the Zouave troops who served in the Crimean War. Soft felt hats were also popular, and you can see in that picture the boys' hats on the table. Knickerbocker or short trousers remained popular into the 1870s, but the Zouave jacket was replaced with either a sailor top or a fitted Norfolk jacket. Again, into the 80s, knickerbockers and short trousers remain the favourite. And like the general trend in menswear, boys' clothing grew quite narrow in the 1980s. This decade also saw a fad for Highland dress, making checks, tartans and kilts popular. The ever-popular sailor suit was also in vogue, reflecting the growing popularity of the season holiday and the traditional pride in the British Navy. The novel Little Lord Fauntleroy was published in 1886. This influenced young boys' fashion with the introduction of velvet tunics and knickerbockers, flounced shirts, and wide lace collars. While the Little Lord Fauntleroy style captured the popular imagination, it was too impractical to become an everyday wear. Older boys in the 1890s adopted adult suits, frequently with Eton collar and tie. The common jacket types were Norfolk jackets, blazers, and lounge jackets with high lapels. And into the 20th century, boys' clothing, again, like the girls, continued much as before. Young boys were in shorts and knickerbockers or sailor suits, and the older boys wore suits that followed their adult counterparts and typically featured a white collar, tight and a tie, and a tight-fitting cloth cap. In the 1910s, boys' clothing, like the girls', was in transition, and photographs show a mix of old and new styles. Short suits continued for formal wear, but in the middle of the decade, low-waist jackets and tunics with cloth belts became fashionable. At the same time, stretch knitted jerseys and At the same time, stretch knitted jersey vests and jacket and jumpers became popular. These were more comfortable and allowed more freedom of movement. Lace-up shoes replaced the Victorian boots. By the 1920s, there were two marked changes to boys' clothing. With the introduction of the romper suit, boy toddlers were no longer dressed as girls. So a key dating clue. Meanwhile, many schools now had uniforms inspired by men's sportswear. That is, a flannel blazer and shorts for younger boys, trousers for older boys, topped off with a cap modelled on cricket caps. And like men, you might also get pictures of boys in fair old sweaters, which were popular at this period. There was little change to boys wear during the 30s and 40s. Blazer, white shirt, flannels and tie remained dominant. Again, shorts for young boys, graduating to longs in their mid-teens. Hand-knitted jerseys worn with white shirts and ties was also the norm. During the war, from 1942, the utility wear meant that long trousers in smaller size were not made, which meant that young boys couldn't wear long trousers at all. Small boys also wore the popular button and braces Buster suit, named after an American cartoon character. The button fastening was a practical measure when elastic for waistbands was scarce. During the 1950s, it became increasingly acceptable for boys to dress more casually when not in school uniform, of course. Ties were abandoned, and although shorts remained dominant for boys, they also started wearing jeans. Colourful and patterned short-sleeved collared shirts were popular for everyday wear. Knitted sweaters and cardigans that had been popular in the 40s continued to be popular in the 50s. And it became less usual or common for young boys to wear jackets or blazers. And don't forget the elastic belt with the snake clip, worn by lots of boys. Okay, has anybody got any questions about that? About any of that?
I think the only thing that's come up in chat so far, Mandy, is a side discussion that me and Gail have been having about whether you can tell the gender of a baby from the shape of its head. We needn't bore the rest of the meeting with that. But there's nothing come through in chat. Anybody, if you want to unmute yourself and shout out at this point, if you've anything to ask so far, apart from how much we miss snake belts.
Yes, I used to envy them. I just want to say, are we going to have a chance to actually share a photo? Because I didn't have any mystery people when we've talked about this before, but I've got a mystery baby now.
Mandy, do you think that Gail might show that now?
Or
later?
Might be easier to do it later because
it won't be right now because I haven't got it right now, but
okay.
I've got one somewhere.
Roger has just raised his hand. Roger, would you like to go? Unmute. You're not on mute, so do speak.
Okay. You're not mentioned anything about social class so far, and I'm wondering what kind of effect that's had. And most of the pictures that we've seen have clearly been studio photographs, which kind of separate them out as for the relatively wealthy people. And now we know this final one, the 50s, which is where I fit in. These are clearly amateur photographs, informal. They wouldn't be dressed up especially for the photographs. They'd just be out there as kids, you know.
Yeah. Well, in the early period, studio photographs were the norm anyway, yeah. And you would have had to be quite, relatively comfortable to get your studio photograph done. Obviously by the 20th century, you've got more relaxed photography happening,
yes.
Which is why these photographs are less studio orientated. But the kind of picking of the photograph really was to show the kind of dress that I was talking about. And as I said at the beginning, for working class boys, I mean, the 1910s, that's working class boys, 1950s are working class boys. It's kind of difficult to talk about what they're wearing because A, it'd be behind the curve. It's what was fashionable last decade and somebody's given it to you. And B, there's less variation in what they're wearing. So that's why I haven't looked too much at the class thing. And you know, we hadn't got 3 days to kind of
No, of course.
get to grips with it. So I was trying to just get a picture, a feel of how things changed.
I think the whole question of class and photography deserves a session of its own,
Yeah.
Roger. So we'll come back to that with the
Yeah.
with the group. Thanks for raising
There's a
it.
there's a very interesting dynamic as well of the studio photographers were had kind of codes written in as to it's how the picture was framed. So then there's subliminal messages in their work, which makes quite an interesting talk as well.
Absolutely. Now I know that two people had the hands up, but one of you has disappeared. So and I didn't notice who it was. So if all your questions are answered, okay.
I'll move on to sport.
Thank you, Mandy.
So we look first of all at tennis. So in the 1980s, post 70s and early 80s, women simply wore their ordinary clothes. Sleeves were long, skirts brushed the ground, wide-brimmed hats and heeled boots further impaired their movement. Add to that the woman is expected to wear all the layers of normal dress, including corset, petticoats and bustle. It must have been quite difficult to play tennis at all. Men fared slightly better. They played in full-length trousers, a shirt, blazer and cap. And in the 1867, rubber-soled sneakers were introduced for men. In the mid-1880s, sports costumes for tennis and for other sports such as archery, boating, shooting, fishing, cycling began to become part of the female wardrobe. Magazines in the late 1880s advertised stylish tennis dresses made from wool, silk, satin, or striped flannel. The skirts were straight and often pleated, but the hems were lifted to 2 to 4 inches off the ground. By the 1990s, a two-piece plain tennis outfit made of lightweight cotton, well starched, but without trimmings, ribbons or bows, was introduced.
Sorry,
Often-
do you mean the 1990s?
The 1890s. Just jumped a decade, century, don't worry. Often one with a bow tie. Although much more practical, it was still relatively restrictive. In 1900s, women followed the lead of men, and a simplified long skirt worn with a long sleeve white blouse and tie was introduced as tennis wear. In the 1920s, that saw the introduction of loose cocktail style dresses who dropped waist below the knee dress with a sporty bandana or visor. By the 30s, waisted pleated mesh dresses were vogue. Skirts were a little shorter, and as well as the shirt sleeves. In the 1940s, dresses shortened and shorts began to be worn. With the end of the war in the 1950s, a ladylike elegance returned to tennis wear. We clinched waists, crisp white dresses, and demure cardigans. But by the 1960s, these dresses have become more businesslike, simple shift styles or pleated skirts and t-shirts. Meanwhile, for the men, in the early 20th century, male tennis players dressed in white flannel trousers, white shirt, and sometimes added a V-necked cable knit sweater. Exactly the same as he would have worn to play tennis. Big Bill Tilden, the world #1 from 1921 to 1925 is generally attributed with introducing the fashion of wearing the shirt sleeves rolled up. And a major revolution took place in men's tennis wear in 1932, when the English tennis player Henry Buddy Austin grew frustrated with having to wear cumbersome flannel trousers and ditched these in favour for shorts. And that remained the kind of traditional wear for men right up until the 50s, 60s. So swimwear. In the mid-1800s, rail travel transformed swimming into a recreational activity which spread to the masses. Modesty laws forbade women to bathe in anything that would reveal their form, prompting many women to go to the length of sewing lead weights into their hems to prevent the fabric from rising up. It probably didn't do much for them being able to rise up either. Amelia Bloomer pioneered the princess suit, comprised of a dress worn over pantaloons or bloomers, and the new garment allowed a fluid movement in the water. 1907, sure, there was a change, because in 1907, swimmer Annette Kellerman was arrested for wearing a cheeky, form-fitting one-piece while demonstrating her diving and swimming skills at a vaudeville show in Boston. In court, Kellerman countered the charge against her suit by saying, "I can't swim wearing more stuff than you hang on a washing line." The judge let the suit go, provided she wore a skirt over it until she entered the water. The new skirtless suit caught on and was known as the Kellyman. In 1910, the Portman Knitting Company took on a one-off commission to produce a fitted woolen knit suit for a rowing team. This created huge public demand, and the modern bathing suit was born. The company changed its name to Janssen and became a leading producer. The suits were made of 100% pure virgin wool, with matching stockings and stocking cap to complete the costume. In the 1921, Janssen coined the term swimsuit as opposed to bathing suit, with their Y-back suit for men. This solidified swimming as a sport for both men and women. In 1932, the backless swimsuit with a built-in bra was patented. Followed in 1936 by the two-piece. The 1930s also saw the introduction of trunks for men. Prior to this time, trunks had been worn with a vest, so you quite often see a vest with swimming trunks. And then, finally, in 1946, the French designer Louis Renard introduced the bikini. Ooh, risque. Also, to cycling. And I looked at this and decided that with cycling, you probably get as much dating information from the bicycle that they're riding as from the costume that they're wearing. So I've gone slightly different on this, and I've looked at the evolution of the bike. So the dates that are here are for are changes to the evolution of the bike as opposed to what people are wearing. And the photograph may have been taken later. So in 1817, Carl Dreas invented the steerable luff machine, which it was commonly called the hobby horse. It had 2 wheels and a seat, but no steering or pedals. In 1839, a Scottish inventor, Kirkpatrick Macmillan, invented a system of levers, pedals, and hand cranks for velocipedes. This allowed riders to propel the machine with their feet off the ground. Over the next decade, a wide variety of designs of machines with 3 and 4 wheels emerged. Pedals were added to the steerable luff machine in 1858. Then in 1866, James Stanley, another British engineer, invented the penny farthing. And I particularly love this picture because if you look carefully, he's actually leaning against the wall. So, and obviously not quite confident enough to just sit on it. In the 1870s, the unicycle was invented. So again, if you see a picture with a unicycle, it's after the 1870s. 1868 saw the painted rubberized wheels. 1876 was the caliper brake. And then in 1879, Henry John Lawson painted the bicyclette, a rear wheel chain driven safety bike. It still had a huge front wheel and a smaller rear wheel, but was quickly superseded in 1885 by John Starley's Rover, a safety bike featuring a steerable front wheel, equally sized wheels, and a chain-driven rear wheel. Much more like the kind of bike that we are familiar with.
Mandy, can we just take a question from Roger at this point?
Yep.
Unmute yourself,
Yeah.
Roger.
The 1870 picture, which you call the unicycle, there looks to be a smaller wheel as well.
You might be right there. Yes, it could be that. Yes, I think you're actually right. I entered unicycle into Google and got a load of pictures, and I didn't spot that one does have a back wheel.
I didn't know
it's
where
the penny farthing. Well spotted.
Hmm.
But the unicycle was invented in 1870.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay.
Okay, Mandy, I don't think there's anything else.
1880s, so the introduction of the tricycle. And also in the 1880s, a ladies' safety bicycle with a step-through frame and a guard over the chain. The tricycle, that was for the 1880s was for the adult tricycle, but it very, very quickly got picked up for children's cycling as well. And if you enter tricycle into a Google search, nearly all the pictures you'll find are of children. So moving on, in 1888, John Dunlop painted the pneumatic inflatable tyre. The tandem was patented in 1889. And all these safety developments were arguably the most important change in the history of cycling. It shifted their use from the public perception of being a dangerous toy for sporting young men, such as the hobby was been, to being an everyday transport tool and leisure activity for both men and women of all ages. This led to bike mania. Throughout the 1880s, 1890s, and well into the 20th century, people were riding every kind of 2-, 3-, and 4-wheeled vehicle that you can imagine. In 1899, an African-American inventor lodged his patent for a folding bike. And the importance of that was it was the first with a recognizably modern diamond frame, which is the pattern still used into the 20th century for bikes. From 1833, the cruiser bikes were invented with the guards over the wheels. And in the 1840s, the kickstand was introduced. So all these different additions can help you work out a rough decade for when a picture might be. Oops, beg your pardon, jumped a slide there. And so to football. In the early years, men simply wore their working clothes when playing football. Team uniforms gradually began to appear, and for most teams, the kit consisted of white, long-sleeved cotton flannelette, roughly woven cotton, or woolen shirts, long flannel trousers, woolen socks, heavy ankle boots, and sometimes coloured caps. It wasn't particularly easy for fans, match officials, and even the players to differentiate between teams on the field. So by the 1867, the football game handbook suggested that opposing teams should have colour variations in their kit. But it wasn't until the 1870s and into the 1880s that standard strips were organised. From this point onwards, coloured and patterned flannelette shirts became the norm. Teams generally chose their colours to reflect the town, school, or association that they were affiliated with. And around this time, trousers were also abandoned for knickerbockers. At the start of the 20th century, some players started to wear the knee shorts known as knickers. Polite society frowned upon this new style of kit, and the FA passed a rule that required shorts to cover the knees. You can see by the 1920s that that length of the short had risen to just above the knee. By 1950, all clubs had to register the colours and design of their players' shirts and socks, and the association and all players had to wear the same colour kit except the goalkeeper, who wore a jersey in a different colour, either scarlet, blue, or white. Green was added to the list at a later date. Teams were all required to have an away strip of an alternative colour. And I think shorter sleeved tunics came in the 1960s, but the gentleman in the group may know more about that than me. And so, to weddings. Of all the the rites of passage celebrated in the Victorian family album, those taken at the time of an engagement or a marriage are by far the most numerous. Nearly every family collection has a wedding photograph in it. These photographs were not necessarily taken on the same day as the wedding. So people would get married, go on honeymoon if they could afford it, and then get dressed back into their wedding outfit to go to the studio to have their photograph taken to commemorate the wedding. The majority of Victorian brides wore the best day dress that they could afford, which they could then rewear or repurpose so that its cut and colour needed to be suitable for other occasions, their best dress. As such, common colours were russet and brown, and some women even had their best dress made in colours such as grey or light purple, so that it would be appropriate to get for both getting married in and for mourning. So how can you tell the difference between an engagement or a wedding picture? Well, there are some clues. In the 1880s, buttonholes and flowers started to appear in portraits as a symbol of marriage. Some women wore their best dress and a wedding veil to get married in. You can also look at the pose of the couple. So if you look at picture number 4, this picture formed part of a series issued for the engagement of Edward, Prince of Wales, and his fiancée Alexandra in 1862. It provoked outrage in the British press because Alexandra has both her hands on Edward's shoulders. For a female to touch a man, it was a sign of the kind of intimacy reserved for a married couple. So these photographs, number 1, married. Not necessarily on the day of the marriage, but they look quite comfortable together, and she looks comfortable with her arm on him. Number 2, probably an engagement. Number 3, just married. And number 4, scandalous. The wealthy, however, could commission a dress to be made to show off their wealth and position. Princess Charlotte's wedding dress in 1816 was made of gold thread and cost £10,000, which is the equivalent to £814,000 today. Queen Victoria is credited with popularising the white wedding dress after she wore an ivory silk gown and veil to marry Prince Albert in 1840. White wedding dresses were not unknown, but as today, royal weddings influence fashion, and so the Queen's bridal style was copied by major dressmakers, spreading the fashion. And white wedding dresses really took off in the middle of the 19th century. Embroidered silk, lace, and floral designs were popular. Bridal veils had fallen out of fashion by the early 19th century, but following Victoria's use of a veil, they came into vogue again. And it was even usual for bridesmaids to also wear white dresses and veils. So the picture here, the lady with her hand in the gentleman's hand is the bride. All the other ladies in white with veils are her bridesmaids. Throughout the Victorian period, the best way to date the bridal gown is to look at the silhouette. And they follow very much the silhouettes of what was fashionable during the period. And in fact, if you look at a group wedding photograph, it's likely to be the bride who is in the most fashionable outfit. With the relaxed style of the Edwardian era approaching, wedding gowns mimic the transition. Suddenly, loose fits and delicate fabrics such as lace were in vogue. Brides in the 1910s opted for simple gowns without any extra ruffles or frills, but layers were still strongly in fashion. There was a big shift in the 1920s bridal fashion as women started wearing sleeker drop waist gowns. Long cathedral length veils were popular and balanced out with simple silhouettes. As the decade wore on, the simple headdresses gave way to more elaborate headpieces, diamond tiaras and floral pieces with decorative hairpins and crowns. These pieces were worn with a veil. As hemlines started to climb during the Roaring Twenties, brides became more adventurous with their wedding day fashions and even opted for dresses cut just below the knee. In the 1930s, most brides were wearing silk or satin dresses, typically opting for long sleeve styles with a train and minimal ornaments or designs. Russian coronet headwear became popular. The bouquet was also very important to one's wedding look. In the 1930s, shower bouquets, also known as long flowering arrangements, were hugely popular. Brides in the early 40s were married against the backdrop of the war, so their outfits reflected the time of austerity. Women typically donned formal pieces that they already owned or borrowed wedding dresses. Consequently, in the 1930s, and consequently in the 1940s, the look remained the same as the 1930s. And in fact, the picture there of the naval gentleman with his bride are my mother and father, and my mother had borrowed a dress that had been made in 1935 for a friend. Even though they got married in 1947. By the 1950s, dresses returned to following fashion. Slim-waisted dresses with full skirts supported with neck petticoats. Short versions were also very popular. Most veils were waist length, which highlighted the slim-waisted gowns. Bird cage veils, that is, a short veil secured with a comb sitting on the top of the head, were in vogue. And there are some of the resources I used. There are many others as well. So, any questions?
Mandy, can
Yes.
I just say that was a tour de force, and considering what you told us at the beginning about having just had COVID, we're in awe of your dedication and capacity. So if you want to just give your appreciation, please,
Thank
to
you.
Mandy. Do you want to stop sharing when you're ready,
Yeah.
please, and then we can see everybody's everybody's faces. So Any questions? Any points you want to raise? Please, now's your time. Jacqueline.
Hi, can I share a photograph, please? Because I'd really like some help with getting it dated. Is that okay? I'll
Yes.
have a go. I'll have a go. Let me see. There he is. There. Okay. This
Oh,
child.
no.
Poor little thing with that hat on. But I'm not. I know he's Charles, but I'm not sure if he's Charles Senior, who was born in 1876, or Charles Junior, who was born in 1906. No, so views
But
interesting.
I would have said the elder.
The older one,
Was the kind of the thing that he's sitting on was kind
yes,
of fashionable in the 1880s, 90s.
the
I
furry
think
rug. Yeah.
furry rug.
Mm.
And the headdress is a bit weird, but
It is, isn't it? It's incredible. Poor thing.
I think so. What did you say the junior was?
The other one, Junior, he was born in 1906.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
I don't know, because look at the shoes.
The shoes,
I
yeah.
think-
I
I
mean,
think
he would have been in America, the younger one, so it might have been a bit different.
yeah.
I'm just wondering, folks, about the soft toy that the child's holding, which seems of the kind, the sort of early branding toys that seem to occur at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. So before the Winnie the Pooh toys come along, there were other earlier ones, and I'm just wondering if it falls into that category. The reason why I say this is it does not look homemade. Doesn't look like a homemade
Yeah.
teddy.
Yeah.
Mm.
And being America, it's kind of slightly different as well. So America, yeah, the kind of fluffy rugs I think would have been more popular than here. I'm not sure. And I'm not sure that I'm being much help to you.
Well,
And it's the mystery of these things, isn't it, Mandy? Like you were saying at the beginning, you can have guidelines, but people cunningly evade them all the time.
yeah, and it's so annoying when they call them. Everyone's got the same name.
Yeah.
You know, father and son have the same name, and you.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. All I can say is I've seen another dated photograph that was 1909 that was broadly
Right.
like this one. That's all I can say to offer it.
Okay, well, thank you for your input.
I think the earlier one was definitely a studio picture. This one, second one, could be an amateur one, which by the turn of the century that was possible.
It would be a very good amateur one, and they've
Oh,
put
it would, yeah.
lovely
I
card.
would say it's a studio one.
Yeah.
It's a-
Shall we go to Gail? If you finished, Jacqueline, are you finished on that point, Jacqueline?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Gail, do you want to?
I've got my baby picture as well. I'm going to see if I can post it in the chat because this worked when we did this before. Oh, there it is. Look, I don't know if how well you can see that. I can do it
It's
as
not loaded for mine yet, is all I can see.
Isn't it? Oh, sorry, because I haven't pressed send. That's why. Now you can see it. Now this is a furry rug one, and this we just found this photo among my mum's old photos, and she's not here anymore to say who it was. It's got nothing written on the back. It could be a photo of her, in which case it would be about 1919, or it could be her mother, who would be in the 1890s, or it could be anybody else, but we're just guessing at that.
Again, I wonder what the child has on in front of its hand. Is it something that's
It's very difficult to see.
Right.
It almost looks as if it could be the top of some kind of a puppy or something like that.
Oh, I see
You
what you
can
mean.
only see it's got some kind of molding to it. It's got a little bit of a curvy shape on the top,
Yeah,
but it's impossible to tell what that is.
absolutely. That's a cracker. Great, isn't it? That's absolutely wonderful.
So any ideas, Mandy, whether it be the earlier or the later?
I think the later, because of it's the sleeve on the dress that's making me think that it looks like it's elasticated.
So it's more likely to be mum
And
than Nana, as it were.
I think so.
Yeah,
I
thank you. Well,
wouldn't
that's
swear to it, but
interesting.
that's kind of what my feeling is.
And Gloria, yes, it does. It does look like it could be the top of a real puppy, but would it stay still for the photograph?
Absolutely.
Or that might be why it's a bit blurry if it didn't stay still.
Wonderful. Any more questions? Anything you'd like to raise? Go on, Gail, you again. Oh no, that was you going. I was being too previous. I mean, I think it's the things that Roger raised about these fashion tips are exactly that, the high fashion. But we all know, even now, we all know those pieces that we cling on to because they're always going to come around again, aren't they? That's what we tell ourselves. Except they shrink dreadfully, don't they?
But I mean, I think the two baby photographs we've just seen actually show how difficult it is to try and date, because it's all the same for a very long time.
Yeah, they bowl you a bouncer, don't they? Straight down the crease. Soon as you come to the wicket, they bowl you a bouncer. But that's what it's all about. And this is why I believe, for example, taking the conversation wider, that artificial intelligence that we're all meant to be very afraid of will never really do anything other than replicate itself, because the randomness of what humans do and what our activities are is demonstrated again and again by the things that we come across and the things that we study. So we can say, all us small historians can all take hope and say, yes, well, you'll never get us, you robots. Just taking a look at chat, lots of people saying thank you, Mandy, which is lovely. And Gail has posted a wonderful wartime photograph. Are we right there, Gail? Is that wartime?
It's just after the war. I think they got married in 1945.
Oh, they'd be still all covered in rationing, wouldn't they? Yes. Goodness me.
With his D-mobs.
It's a very good suit if it is a D-mob suit. Goodness me. Yes. And are these from your family, Gail?
Sorry,
yes,
yeah.
you posted it there. Sorry.
Yeah, it's my mum and dad. Yeah.
Well, they're lovely, aren't they?
I've also got earlier on, Mandy put up a group photo of the family with some of them sitting on the table, the littlest ones. I've got one just like that of my mum and her mum and dad and siblings.
But that one was actually my grandfather, and the little boy on the table was my dad.
Oh, look at that. How lovely. Oh, dear, dear, dear. That's wonderful. Now, just as an aside, and again, emphasizing the sort of what's going on in the projects and so forth, I'd like to just, if you've got questions, do keep shouting out and asking, but I'm just going to draw your attention to the survey that I sent to everybody on the mailing list. And it's simply talking about things that as a group you might want to cover and learn or discuss more about going forward. And this is a bid that's being made by Laura and Jane, the two academics who are running this project at Royal Holloway and Leeds universities. And they're trying to get funding to do more workshops going into 2024 and 25. And this is an opportunity for you to express your views. And thank you very, very much to all of you who have done this so far. There've been some very, very interesting responses. There's space for you to actually add things that you think haven't been mentioned or haven't been covered. and you can write as much or as little as you want. And so if you have not had a go at that, please do. The link is in the last email that I sent to you, and I will send it again when I send out the recording of this session. And what I'm just going to do is, before we go to the next question, is stop the recording